morning, everyone. Welcome to Founder's Story. I'm Megan Hoffman, associate on our investments team. I focus on all of our life sciences deals. And I'm joined by Isaiah, co-founder and VP of operations at Inversa. So I'll go ahead and let you do a little bit of an intro of yourself, your background, and just give us some context on what Inversa does.
So thanks so much to Megan and to Rev1 for giving me the opportunity to talk here. So a little bit about myself. I have a master's in biostatistics from the Ohio State University, and I started in life sciences. A few years after that, I had a brief stint in politics, but then I started at Akebia Therapeutics, which was started by Dr. Robert Shalwitz, who is also my father, who is also the CEO of Inversa. There was a spin-out from Procter & Gamble in Cincinnati for a drug for anemia associated with chronic kidney disease. And then I joined as their statistician, but I didn't really see myself as an entrepreneur for many years after that. Not until actually the company went IPO, moved to Boston, got a whole new management. Bob actually left the company. I was promoted to program manager, so I led one of the drug development teams there for a couple of years, commuted back and forth from here to Boston. And then I really learned all the details about drug development at that point. But I'm not going to tell the whole story because I don't think I'm really allowed to, but I kind of saw the new management at Akebia at that point, and if you talk to me privately, I can tell you the backstory there, because it's not a fun tragedy, but it is a little bit of a tragedy. Anyway, I saw what they were doing there, and I realized if these guys could run a company and get paid Boston-size C-suite dollars, I could definitely do my own company. And after a few years of that, I had this opportunity when Bob discovered yet another opportunity to start a company, and then we started Inversa about 10 years ago.
And can you give us a little context on what Inversa is focused on, what stage of development you're in, kind of where you're at today, and then we'll work through sort of where you started.
Great. So Inversa started around a natural molecule that exists in every cell of every living thing. It was started around novel properties of the molecule that had never been discovered before, specifically antiviral properties for adenovirus, which there is still no treatment for. And then we also discovered a composition of matter around the compound as well. So we had, a clear use patent and a composition of matter patent, which is obviously the core of any life sciences company. And then we got some early funding, and the compound worked in the antiviral space, and that's where we kicked off. Our first condition that we were going after is viral pink eye, viral acute conjunctivitis. Not many people know that most pink eye is viral. You come in with pink eye and you just get into antibiotic drops, but what most people know is that it doesn't really do anything if it's the viral form of the disease. So it's still an unmet need market. There's no treatment there. We also had a great business case at the time. This begins the fun part of the Inversa story. So a year before we started the company, another pink eye company was acquired for $300 million by Shire. So it was a great validation case. And our plan, because we didn't think that drug was very good, and that was proven to be so not too long after that, because everyone thought that drug was going to get approved, they were going to enter the market, create the market, and then we were going to be a second comer that was going to be better, which is a solid story in life sciences, because creating the market is challenging, requires a large sales force. People aren't excited to hear that, but if it's already created and you come in as a better drug, that's a lower risk profile. That's what we were going after. But then things changed.
Yes, and so you've talked about where you started, the initial indication and sort of the finding of the molecule. Now, Inversa today looks very different from where you started. Can you talk a little bit about that journey and how you've shifted to what Inversa looks like today?
Yeah, thanks. So we were very successful at raising capital. We raised some venture capital dollars, and we also raised non-dilutive funding from BARDA. We're the first drug to show promise in treating ocular sulfur mustard gas injury, a potential terrorist threat. So we have a very large contract from BARDA. I'll talk more about that later. But we were able to raise enough money to get through toxicology, early regulatory, and through phase 2 clinical trials. So we did 2 phase 2 clinical trials. We did more than that, but these are the 2 we'll talk about. One in all-comers pink eye, to try to go after that market. And then the second one in dry eye. So I'll talk about the first one. So that company that I talked about, that one that was acquired for $300 million, well, maybe some of you don't know, but Shire was acquired, so that didn't help the case because it was like, what's happening to that molecule? And then we found out that that molecule completely failed its phase 3 trials. So that actually, even before we got our data, which turned out to be really good in all-comers pink eye, we were already at a major disadvantage. In fact, like Fun's little side story, we had a competitor who's still, I think, around a little bit. They had the same business case that we did. They raised funds. They were going after all-comers pink eye as a second comer. I talked to their CEO shortly after, like, the Shire drug, like, completely collapsed, and he was like, this is really bad. And he actually presented some pretty successful early phase 2 data and then left the company. That's how much kind of like the bottom dropped in our business case, because then we were seen as like, going into a space where multiple drugs had failed. This big Shire drug that everyone expected to succeed failed. Several other drugs had failed before that, so that was made it really rough. But I'm going to say for the record, since this is being recorded, Inversa does have by far the best data for all-comers pink eye there has ever been and probably ever will be, because there is a misunderstanding about the space that I just want to, again, mention for the record. So every other drug to go after pink eye has gone directly after the adenovirus itself to try to destroy the adenovirus. Inversa's drug, which I didn't talk about the mechanism, so this is a good opportunity, works by promoting the innate immune response and your natural DNA repair mechanism. So it goes after the virus and bacteria in a sideways way, but that makes it, a very different type of molecule. So every other drug that has gone after this adenovirus just destroys the adenovirus, but adenovirus is a DNA-based virus. So if you destroy DNA-based virus, you're also damaging your own DNA. And so we know that every attempt has also caused other irritation in a disease where you're seeking treatment to resolve your irritation. So no one's going to want to take a drug that worsens your irritation, even if it might kill the adenovirus. And so that's part of the reason why they've all failed. And so when we did our study with a drug that approaches it very differently, we actually have the best data. But as I mentioned, the market interest when the Shire drug failed really collapsed. And then, unfortunately, not too long after that, we ran into an FDA obstacle we really didn't expect. And the FDA put a very unreasonable burden on what a clinical trial is needed to get a drug approved for all-comers pink eye. So Inversa's 10 years old, about 10 years old, but, and now I'll go to the silver lining, the other trial, the dry eye trial, but we've made a dramatic pivot over the last year and a half. We did a dry eye trial. There's a bunch of history in dry eye, I won't go into it, but there's definitely a desire for a drug that can treat a subset of the dry eye population. It's a multi-billion-dollar market. Maybe some of you have heard about Restasis. There's now several other drugs that are approved in the space. But it's a very heterogeneous space. There's a desire for a drug that can treat a specific subgroup and do something very different and profound for that group, but no one's ever done it before. And we have discovered through our data that there is a space that everyone has overlooked in the corneal surface, and that is diabetic keratopathy. Keratopathy is like when the cornea gets enough epithelial and endothelial damage that it gets poor fluid dynamics, so it gets excess fluid inside the cornea, which is called the stroma. And you can imagine that if your cornea is not perfectly smooth, you don't refract light properly. So if you get extra fluid in there, you get literally blurred vision. And no one's ever treated it before. And but also no one's ever had data before. So in the last year and a half, we discovered that we had this data that no one's ever described before. We also have our sulfur mustard data showing that we treat really severe keratopathy. But when we were contemplating ideas where to pivot the drug. No one had ever suggested diabetic keratopathy. And I want to give a little bit of background on a lot of overlooked diseases in pharma. This has actually happened many times before. A good example that's close to home is dry eye in general. Before restasis happened, right, dry eye was seen as a nuisance disease. You come in with like itchiness or dryness of the eye. It was dismissed. It's like, just take better care of yourself. Like, why would a drug make a lot of money in this disease? It's not a huge deal. Of course, once there's a drug that can be easily prescribed, it's a billion-dollar drug. Another good example that everyone is familiar with is Viagra, right? Erectile dysfunction. Before, like, it's just, you go to from the doctor's point of view, you come in with ED, they're just like, that's too bad. But like, I'm dealing with really sick, dying patients over here. Once you have a drug, huge market. That's what we have the potential for here. These are diabetics with everyday blurred vision, no treatment, and we have significant phase 2 data showing we're improving the vision in these patients. So yes, in the last year, we've had this major pivot where we've discovered this new indication, brand new data that no one else has. We've had to familiarize ourselves with the space. We've had to talk to lots of experts. And then the key thing that happened, I don't know if that's the next question, when did we know we have commercial potential?
Yeah, we can do that one next. It's a good one.
That would be 5 months ago. When we did a third-party payer study to talk to payers if a drug with the profile that we expect to achieve, would it be lumped in a separate group from general dry? Because if we were in general dry on the market, we would just be behind all these other approved dry eye drugs and we'd never get any attention. And we were very nervous going into that study, but we had to do it. And universally, and this is a payer study that covered over 120 million lives, the payers were like, if you have a diabetic-only label and you are improving vision, which all the other dry eye drugs are improving symptoms, dryness, irritation, you're improving vision. That's a totally different drug. These diabetics definitely are undertreated, and you have a great opportunity here. And this has all happened in the last 5 months. We got that survey. We've started to present it to strategics, to VCs, and it's definitely been an exciting few months. We're just getting a lot of traction, a lot more attention. For me personally, it's definitely been a big deal since I've been 8 years in pink eye, just struggling to get attention, even with the best data we have. And it's been even up to last week, we went to Arvo, presented to some major strategics that we've been talking to for years that have just kind of just smiled and nodded when we present. But for the first time, they're like engaging, asking questions, being like, this really sounds like a thing. So it's been a super exciting microcosm of the 10-year Inversa journey.
But I think it's important because, part of this talk and something that we wanted to have a discussion about is the life sciences market today and what investors and strategic expectations are around your not only clinical data, but the commercial opportunity for your asset. And I think that Inversa's story very much highlights where things have shifted. And so throughout this process, and I think this is a later question, I'm going to ask it now because it's a good segue. What have you learned? And I know it's a lot, but with this major pivot in the last year and the attention that you've gotten now more recently with the shift in your lead indication, like what, looking back, would you have done differently?
I think I'm just going to pivot to what have I learned instead of what would I have done differently. I'm not going to talk about that. I do brainstorm in my head, like, how could we have found this, like, invisible indication? But there's just no easy answer to it. It just like ED and these and dry to the doctor. You present with blurred vision. They're used to like blinding vision issues, cataracts, like severe dystrophy, obviously some sort of obvious defect or edema in the eye. You come in with blurred vision. They're like, tough luck. here's a couple, I'll try a few eye drops. Well, I mean, what we've learned, I think, in relation to this specific question, because I think there'll be several other learnings that we'll talk about, is strategics and VCs need like a very concise, clear, intuitive story. They, fortunately or unfortunately, we're in a space where, like, especially with the advent of AI, that these groups are looking for engineered profiles, like literally A to B to C to D. You tell me that this is going to work. They love very targeted molecules. They love antibodies. They love, well, gene therapies has a payment issue, so they don't as much love that. But they love the concept that you're like clearly targeting this one thing. You can show, hey, this is an animal with the gene therapy. This is without. This is with the knockout, and it suddenly the animal walks. And so if you're doing something more complicated like we are, which is promoting the body's innate mechanisms, which is more complicated, you still got to break it down into something very intuitive for these companies. So because they just have a attention span of 5 minutes, because they're just seeing everyone. It's a buyer's market out there, especially with China in the space. They are just seeing a lot of assets, so they want to know very quickly. Like, you have a large market, you have data that no one else has, and you have a mechanism that is easy to understand. And we're still working on that pitch because we have something more nuanced. But that's probably one of the biggest learnings in relation to this specific question.
And you guys have been around for 10 years now. You've made pivots. You have a significant amount of clinical data. And while Rev1 has been a part of that journey, there have been others that are a part of that journey. And something that you hit on was the BARDA relationship. Can you talk a little bit about the team's use of non-dilutive funding, your relationship with someone like BARDA, and how that's allowed you to generate the extent of data that you have and sort of help get you to this point?
Great. Yeah, I mean, BARDA has been instrumental in Versa. We wouldn't exist without them. We were actually kind of a bit of on our last leg when we got into BARDA. BARDA has been from the beginning, and then we've since really fostered the relationship. From the beginning, we saw an opportunity with BARDA, but we saw the opportunity, and then we really bent over backwards to make sure we engaged and enrolled anyone who was interested in the sulfur mustard space. So the real way we got BARDA is we made a believer out of this guy from the Army who was doing the sulfur mustard studies that BARDA trusted. He was like the resident expert in ocular sulfur mustard, and he's like, I think these guys really got something. And actually, in over a very short period of time is when we really built the BARDA trust by engaging BARDA, the individual people at BARDA, at multiple levels. Obviously, we had data. We had really good data that no one else had, and then engaging their stakeholders. And through that process, we were able to get a very large contract to the tune of totally about $30 million to develop the drug for commercial use. And we're still getting money from BARDA, and since then we've gotten additional funds from BARDA because we've continued to foster the relationship. They have a lot of administrative requirements that I know other companies have struggled with, but we've embraced them every time. There's a fun little story where BARDA had a new accounting software. Suddenly they're like, you need to do your reporting completely differently. So we did the reporting, and they're like, we don't actually know what we're looking at because we don't know how to use our own accounting software. To which we replied, we're going to learn your accounting software and then teach it to you so we can get past this. And that is exactly what we did. But we've over-communicated by fostering the relationship, over-communicating, being on time, filling out every reporting requirements, answering every consultant question, because they have a whole bunch of consultants that their job is to poke holes at you, which is important. It's an important part of the process. We have been able to gain additional funds from BARDA that I know other companies have struggled with, and that's obviously been a huge deal. And then, of course, we've been very responsible with our venture capital money as well.
Yes, your team has definitely been incredibly capital efficient. I mean, between the BARDA funding and the VC funding, which the amount you've raised compared to other companies that are trying to get through phase 2 trials, it's a very small amount of money in the grand scheme of things, and you've done a lot with it. And so now, the team is ready to enter your registrational trial. You are out actively fundraising to be able to do that. Can you talk about how your engagement with the FDA has evolved? What does that look like now that you're in later stage program development? And what have been learnings from that experience?
The FDA, yes. So much fun. I think if people don't know, if you've never been to an FDA meeting, I think concisely put why every pharma person is nervous about the FDA is because you usually come in and you have a lot of things you need to figure out, right? Because if you really only, these trials are expensive. You don't want to get them wrong. If, assuming you get the data you want to make sure it meets the FDA requirements. But every FDA meeting takes at least 3 months of prep time, and you get 1 hour. And that's it. They just cold stop after that. And so that's what the stress is. You need to make sure every word you say is perfect so you get the answer you want and get the feedback you want, because you don't want to keep going back for answers. Anyway, so I've had the privilege of being a part of multiple FDA meetings, some with a whole bunch of, with FDA meetings where a lot of unexpected things happen. I did mention that for pink eye, we ran into some unexpected issues there. But actually for diabetic dry / keratopathy, it's been fairly smooth. I'm gonna talk about my learnings of the FDA, and that I don't think I appreciated this when we first met. But the FDA, the current FDA, is 200% driven by endpoints that can be easily understood by the naive patient. So a good example, this is the example that I brainstormed over the last few days. So let's say you have a blood pressure drug, and let's say it works, it lowers blood pressure. The endpoint of lowering blood pressure to people who are in life sciences is a good endpoint. But to the FDA, they're going to take the view of the naive patient, and let's assume we're the patient will be like, what does that mean to me? What do I get to run faster? Do I get to sleep better? Do I have less heart attacks? That's the type of endpoint that they're going to look for. So the downside there is, let's say they take an extreme example. So you have a blood pressure medication, but they're like, we want to see what % of people in the blood pressure in the medication group, has heart attacks over a 2-year period, and 1%, and the other one doesn't, right? And so, but the challenge there is then you have to extrapolate your statistics. Your statistics are really not the total number of people in the trial. It's the total number of people that actually get heart attacks, because those are the two numbers you're comparing to. So let's say only 5% of the people in a treated group get heart attacks. You basically have to multiply your sample size by 20, which is huge. But this is also the art of it, because then they're open to other endpoints as long as they're intuitively meaningful to the patient. So for us, our chief endpoint that the FDA likes is a change in blurred vision, but on a 5-point scale, right? So it's 5 points, so it's meaningful. So if you go from a 2 to a 1, ideally a patient could be like, okay, that's like I dropped my rate of blurred vision by 50%. That's meaningful. That's what they want. If you extend it to a 20-point or a more maybe appropriate nuanced scale, they don't like that as much. And so similarly, I just think this is the thing, if you're ever approaching with the FDA, and I think with devices as well, they just want that endpoint. So there is an art to finding an endpoint that is not going to explode your sample size, but also is meaningful to the FDA. And obviously we're doing that now with dry. We have a successfully agreed endpoint, but I think that's the biggest learning to take away from those meetings.
And to stay on the topic of clinical development, let's talk about some of the challenges that the team has faced in clinical development with vendor relationships and such. Can you give an example?
Yeah. So, well, at the time before the disaster occurred, I was very excited. We were going to do a clinical trial, and we did. We did a clinical trial in Thailand. We did the first part of the pink eye trial in Thailand. I really pushed that idea a lot, and it had a great basis for it. And I still think it could have been good had we not run into something. Pink eye is an acute spontaneous disease. So spontaneous diseases are hard to enroll. But you can imagine pink eye is more frequent in an urban setting, in a tropical setting. So we need like a bunch of parameters to be hit. We need an urban setting, a tropical setting. So that narrows obviously the window and the earth that we're looking at. We need a healthcare system that's reliable, which also very tough, and a healthcare system that people trust. And actually Thailand, because they've invested a lot of money into their healthcare system, because they like their health tourism a lot, their people really trust their doctors. But going into it, I actually asked around ophthalmology. Everyone was like, I've never done anything in Thailand. So it was definitely seen as risky at the time, but the price was right. I visited, the doctors said they can roll. I saw the numbers. And so I was there for a month and a half working on starting this study. And actually we were off to a great start. It was ripping and rolling. We were getting patients in, the doctors were following. It was fantastic. And then we discovered shortly after I got back here that the CRO we were working with was bankrupt. The CEO had not told us, her employees, anyone, that they had basically run out of money. And so, it was a big tragedy because like the employees we were working with, the doctors we were working with, all great. It was just this one person who then hid very essential financial information. And so we had to make a pivot super fast. We brought it to the U.S. We've hired another CRO, but man, it was just, unbelievably stressful. We had to spend $1 million of cash that we did not, over $1 million of cash we didn't plan on doing. We had to combine the data sets. We still had to audit the Thailand data set. It was a huge deal. And of course, looking back, now you know that we're not really focused on that data set, even though it was the best. But we pulled it off. We made it work. Still managed to have enough money to do the dry eye trial, which we're now using to raise funds on. But it was a testament to Inversa, the employees at Inversa, our skill, our connections to be able to pivot this trial in a very short period of time, our persistence, our just overnight, every night working communication with the few Thailand people that we could trust to pivot this trial and make it work and not be a total collapse. And that I think it is a testament to Inversa's skill as a company that we were able to pull that off without further disaster.
And in life sciences specifically, your vendor relationships with your CDMO, your CRO, like it's a lot of, third-party engagement, as well as the team that you'd already built helped move the company forward. And so can you talk a little bit more about the team, how the team has evolved, any new players on the team that have been really key and sort of where you are today?
Yeah, I think, so this is like, I was thinking about what I wanted to say about the advice section to not, to go overboard. I think any advice I want to give, the title of the advice is rigor, is any claims about Inversa, about our employees, which are all true. Like, we have excellent employees. We have had to, we've had some changeover, but really fantastic employees, really fantastic relationships, excellent stewardship of our capital, ability to generate data and other relationships that have benefited Inversa is rigor, because it's that we made successful decisions hundreds of thousands of times to make that claim now, right? It's over 10 years we've made sure we save money every time a contract comes up, every time anything involving money comes up. We're constantly being like, what's absolutely necessary here? What can we cut? Can my father and I stay in the same Airbnb? Yes, I guess that's possible. And so same with employees. We've just been rigorous about it. We recognize from the get-go that when you're in a startup land, you usually only have the capacity to make a single decision once, usually, because it takes a lot of time and capital to repair an incorrect decision. So, we have really in-depth discussions about any vendor we choose, about any employee we hire. Like, we've really broken it down, not just in my own head, but also with other, senior members of the company. It's like, is this person, is this group we want to work with? Like, do they meet all the standards? Do they have the connections we want? Do they have the personality we want? Have we done a trial run with them? Like, how do they have, how have their references been? How, what is their CV like? Like, we've done such a thorough analysis of every person or group we've met with, so we're as confident as we can be when we make that decision, so we don't have to, make amends later. Obviously, we've been wrong. It'll be a big learning lesson to never to double check the CEO's finances in future CRO discussions. But we've done that. That type of rigor for every decision is what's led us to today to be like, yes, we have a great team, and we've been very capital efficient.
And so now, the team is, again, you've gotten to the point where you're at later stage clinical trials, you're out pounding the pavement, fundraising for your Series C. Can you talk about the team's current priorities and how you're navigating the life sciences financing market right now?
So much fun. So we're out raising our phase 3 funding. We have hired a firm to work with, and so they're helping us with our story. I mean, we've seen over the last year, we got the data, we had the idea where the data could lead to, but we've spent a year really refining the story, and then this firm we hired is going to further refine it, and that just never stops. You're just constantly trying to get that 5-minute pitch down so you say all the right things and none of the wrong things, because everyone is looking for an excuse to say no to you. So you're just, find those keywords. Like, I can definitely think of examples over the last few months where I'm like, what if we just say that over that? And like, it can make a huge difference. And so that's also just the rigor. Like, you just got to be constantly introspective and examining. But yeah, we're out there. We're talking to everyone. Now, there's a lot of scam out there, so you got to do some background research, but you're just constantly talking to everyone. There's a lot of this industry, like a lot of industries, is still a connections game. If we get a warm intro to a VC or strategic, it's going to make a huge difference. I also think of even the strategics we met at Arvo. These are people that I built a relationship over multiple years, where they said no multiple times, but leading up to finally like fruitful discussions that we've had up to even a week ago. And that's, again, just rigor. It's just, as soon as you start the startup, you got to start building relationships, because you don't know how many years it's going to take to get to where you want to go. I even think of this guy we met last week, not a deal we did. He did another deal with another company, but when he talked about it, he was like, I knew the CEO of that company because I used to work for him, right? So like, he did a deal with another company based on a relationship he had because he used to work for him. I have no idea if the data is good of that company, but that's what we've been focusing on, building these relationships, fostering them, and finally getting to a place now that we're getting the positive feedback to hopefully raise our phase 3 financing. And ideally, you pit people against each other, because that's how they really start moving, right? We'll get there at some point.
Some friendly competition. And so with your experience with Inversa and in life sciences previously, what's your advice for others building companies in the life sciences space today?
So much advice. So the quintessential advice I will give is that to keep inspiring everyone you're working with. Like, you're just going to get the best out of your employees, your CROs, your board members. literally anyone you talk to, if they really believe you have an asset that's going to benefit like humanity preferably, or at least make a lot of money. And that process of inspiring also just takes a lot of time because they don't, they weren't, no one's been waist deep in your company except you and whoever else has founded the company. So you just got to keep informing people. Be like, this is a new data. Look at this new data. Look how cool this is. Look at this new piece of thing. I've thought about this thing. Like we're doing this just constantly. Even if they're just smiling and nodding to you, you're just over many years, assuming you believe in your compound and you have something that's great, they will believe in you, and then you're going to get better results from that. But it might feel like you're just kind of throwing spaghetti at the wall, but it's so important to just keep that inspiration going through many years to get the results you want to get.
Well, thank you. This has been really great. I want to make sure that people have the opportunity to ask questions. So if you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand. It looks like Ashley has a mic ready to go.
Thanks. It was really interesting. I've actually 3 questions. I'll ask 2. Choose what to respond to.
That's fine.
Related to kind of the 2 indications that you have, I guess you described, obviously you had the conjunctivitis one fail and had to pivot really quickly. I was curious how you knew to pivot to dry eye. Did you have a prioritization? You just picked the second one off the list, or did you already have that underway, and how did you do that so quickly? And then I guess relatedly, obviously you have data in the pink eye in the back of your mind, or even presently, are you utilizing that as sort of like a future play in terms of the expansion opportunities for the company or for the asset?
Thanks. So I'll ask the third question first. I mean, we're really not focusing on pink eye just because it's just no market interest. I can't think of another startup pink eye that's occurred in the last few years. I know 2 other companies with data. They're also going nowhere. It's just not an area that any of these ophthalmology companies are interested in, unfortunately. They don't even take the time to hear our pitch. I mean, it's unfortunate. We have the best data, but between that and then the FDA requirement that we currently don't have a way to get around, it just makes it unfeasible. So for dry, we did a general dry study, and then a quarter of the population was diabetics, and we looked at BCVA, and we found that the diabetics had a dramatic difference in best corrected visual acuity. And that's really where we're like, oh my gosh, what is going on here? Because this is clearly different from the general diabetes. And then, we just examined the data, we examined the literature, and discovered this condition that been overlooked by the literature and overlooked by the ophthalmology community as a possible condition. That's how it started, and then between that and combining that with our data showing, significant improvement in vision that no one else had showed before, which is of course the end-all be-all endpoint for anything eye-related. That we went from there to do further research and be like, I think we have something here to really address this underlying keratopathy. It's a subtle keratopathy. That's probably the key thing why it's been overlooked. This is, before diabetics had metformin and other, there's so many diabetic control medications now. They had severe keratopathy where, come in and there'd be very clearly opaque corneas. It was just like, you can't see, it's really hard to see out of that. That doesn't really happen too much anymore. They have enough control that they're coming in, they're just complaining of blurred vision. But between the fact that it's blurred vision, so it's not, again, vision threatening, and the fact that there's no readily available machine in general ophthalmology to look at this. It's a little tricky to visualize it. You can, but just most people don't have the correct equipment. And then, furthermore, no one had a study to show that it can be treated. It's just a classic overlooked indication. In many ways, dry eye was there wasn't a lot of dry eye research until Restasis, and then now you go to any ophthalmology conference and it's just like hundreds of dry eye posters, just an overwhelming amount of it, and that didn't exist until Restasis established $1 billion plus market. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, well done, Isaiah and Inversa team. As you think about your payer research, curious, do you think you'll have to get a new ICD-10 code established to drive reimbursement? Because I don't think one exists for diabetic dry eye.
That's correct. One definitely does not exist. We've actually done research in that regard. Just simply put, since it's like a direct question, it sounds like from our payer research, if they just mark diabetes and dry eye, that's basic, and blurred vision, that's sufficient to get the premium reimbursement and preferred branding that we expect. Because that was enough description based on our payer discussions that they're like, that makes it an entirely unique category. I got the directional mic. So the question is the FDA open to a quantitative biomarker as an endpoint for any specific disease, in the respect that let's make an assumption that there's some literature or cause that the biomarker is related to morbidity or mortality. And so movement of that biomarker will make a difference for that patient. So first you have to make that first case very strongly, that this biomarker, especially if it's not been used before, that it's associated with morbidity and mortality. So the FDA can make that case of the patient. And then second, what we've seen in regards to quantitative markers like blood pressure, which is a more established marker, but we know other markers in ophthalmology. Anyway, you have to establish what a disease threshold is first. So every patient comes in with that marker, or usually less or more, right? And then you have to determine what the normal threshold is. And so then they'll take the percent of patients moving from disease threshold to normal threshold, assuming you've done the first argument successfully. But that can be often a big jump, right? You're talking about really diseased patients, and you have to move them to completely normal biomarker, which if you're anyone in pharmaceuticals, you know that's a big task, but it's possible. That's usually when I've seen they'll take it as a primary endpoint, but otherwise, not.
This is a very big picture question, but you talked a lot about the hurdles that you faced along the way, and I think for a lot of new companies, those would be the end of the game, right? So you find out your CRO is bankrupt, you find out that other companies are failing at passing their clinical trials, and so what I'm curious about is what's unique about your company that differentiated you towards success that might lead others to fail?
So thank you for that. So, I mean, I'll be honest, the first answer to that question is have a Bob in your company. Because if you have a Bob, he will take the role of multiple full-time employees and save you a lot of cash. Bob is my father, and he is incredibly skilled at all things pharmaceutical development, down to CMC, to toxicology, to regulatory, to legal, all those things. That is definitely a big reason why we've been able to save capital. But then the second point is still going back to like one of my themes that I'm trying to, to tell the crowd here is that it's rigor. It's just you build up the success, you build up your savings by successfully saving money over hundreds of thousands of decisions. So you make as few mistakes as possible. So when the mistake does happen, you have capital, you have political capital with your, with your board members and VCs to repair the damage, right? I mean, when that thing in Thailand happened, we obviously had to tell the board, we had to tell BARDA, we had to tell everyone we know that this is a problem. We're going to have to spend a bunch of capital, and yet they stuck with us because they believed in us, and we had up to that point been incredibly responsible with our money and over communicating all those things. So, and also it hasn't happened again. So that's it. It's just you got to almost build that buffer of success. So when that failure happens, you can handle it. 'Cause you just you just don't have the capital and time to handle that many failures, unfortunately.
And not to put words in your mouth, but something that I've seen from the VC end working with Inversa too is that going back to the barter relationship and having that barter relationship early on, being able to leverage the non-dilutive funding through a federal funding source early to help de-risk the technology, I think has also been huge in your success because you've been able to take on less private capital in that sense. So I think that having that sort of partnership early on and funding source was also definitely a huge reason why Inversa has been able to get where they are.
I'm just going to tell a brief story of a fun decision-making that we had.
Do it.
Great. So early on when we went to the FDA for our pre-IND meeting with on pink eye, and this is another like small piece of advice is, though you have to do it anyway when you're an entrepreneur, is you have to talk to everyone. You have to get advice from everyone because within all the advice you're going to get, which a lot of it you'll be like, okay, whatever, there's going to be like tiny little nuggets. There's also going to be bad advice, and that's what this story is about. So before we went to the pre-IND, we had a regulatory consultant that we'd used previously at Akebia, who's very good, and we still use her. She's fantastic. But someone suggested you should talk to this, premier ophthalmology-focused regulatory consultant, like a guy who that's all he did. And we talked to him. We told him about our idea about what we're going to ask the FDA, what we're going to propose, and what we hope to achieve. And he really trashed it. Myself, Bob, our current regulatory consultant, we're all on the phone, and he just really trashed it. He's like, they're gonna say no to everything. You need to do more studies, or you're really gonna start off this relationship with the FDA really poorly. And that was super scary. We didn't, that was early days of funding pre-BARDA, so super frightening because we're like, not only is he right, but if he's right, then we have to do more studies. Like we're really in a tough shape here. So we had to take a big breath, big step back, really look at what we were proposing, and again, deconstruct it in your mind and rebuild all the logic in our mind to be like, is what we're asking, does it make very intuitive sense? Is it backed by data? Can we argue it fully if they push back? What would their potential counter arguments be? Can we argue that? Everything be because if we get this wrong, this could be a huge issue. And then we took a hard look at it and we're like, okay, what we're asking here is completely reasonable. We have data to back it up. We have rationale. So nothing to do with there's obviously experience, but it's just pure, simple logic with everything we were asking and the data to back it up. And then we went to the FDA and everything was fine. Totally fine. They totally basically agreed with everything, no problem. And yeah, it's just, I think about that because we're like, man, that guy, he's still a revered legend in ophthalmology regulatory. And it was he was just so dead wrong. And we could have made a really bad decision there and we avoided it. Afterwards, he did ask us hey, what was the FDA feedback? And we're like, everything was fine. And he's like, can I have a summary of the minutes? And we sent it to him and then we never heard anything again. But just an example of how important these decisions are and how you got to really be in touch with yourself so you're 100% confident going into the decision so you get where you want to go.